Yes, it is.
Delia, okay, great. My name is Maribel Nash. I'm a senior research analyst at Cooley, and I'm here to introduce our speakers for the next session. UC, a look at open access from idea to implementation. First, we have Rice Majors. As the Associate University Librarian for Scholarly Resources, Rice manages the entire life cycle of UC Davis Library's collections, from acquisition and description to assessment and strategy. He's an active participant in UC's open access initiatives, which have included selected vendor negotiations and the implementation of transformative agreements. His research interests include sustainable models for open access and improving the effectiveness of collection development. Rice has over 25 years of experience working in and with libraries, including 8 years in library administration and 6 years in the library technology industry. Prior to coming to UC Davis, Rice held positions at Santa Clara University, the University of Colorado at Boulder, and Innovative Interfaces. Next, we have Sarah McClung. Sarah is the head of collection development at the University of California, San Francisco, where she oversees the development and management of the library's extensive health sciences collections, as well as serves as the interlibrary services manager. She represents UCSF on many UC-wide groups, including the Shared Content Leadership Group, to collaborate and make decisions on system-wide collection development and management. Sarah has held multiple leadership positions in the Northern California and Nevada Medical Library Group and the Librarians Association of the University of California, and is frequently invited to present at the Charleston Conference. She has worked in academic health sciences libraries for over a decade. And finally, we have Ramona Collins. In her capacity as head of access services at Berkeley Law Library, Ramona creates and implements circulation policies and supervises a crew of circulation assistants who staff the front desk during the 100 weekly hours the library is open. She also processes all course reserve materials, provides reference help, manages an informal ILL agreement among local law school libraries, and supervises library staff responsible for the faculty paging service. Ramona has been active in NoCal for 18 years in various positions, including past president. She is currently chair of the Librarians Association for the University of California, Berkeley Division. Last year, in her vice chair role, she attended Berkeley Faculty Library Committee meetings. Welcome, Rice, Sarah, and Ramona.
Thank you. Okay, not working? Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I think we have a somewhat heterogeneous audience here in terms of type of library that folks work at, both law firms and academic law librarians and perhaps some others. So I'm going to take a little bit of time and from a big picture standpoint, talk about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and make sure that we all have a shared understanding before we go into some of the outcomes that we've had. So you're all familiar with the University of California, I'm sure, on some level, but I think what's important here is what drove us to engage in this pretty broad range project here, which is that we have $5.5 billion in research funds flowing through the university every year across the 10 campuses. It's a research intensive multi-campus system. We are the largest we have the largest scholarly output in North America, and we account for a lot of research, both domestically and worldwide. And we have a great track record of negotiating with publishers and other vendors. And we have a whole team that has expertise in this area. So this is a lot of money flowing through a public institution. A lot of that money was already public money before it got to us. It came from federal sources and other funding sources. So this is a lot of public money going into research, with the research output ending up perhaps behind a sorry, I don't think that's me, but if you're not muted, you might mute. So this is a little bit of why we took this on. We felt like we were in a position to negotiate from a position of power. And there's just a lot of money at play that we had concerns about in terms of how the research output could or could not be used by the general public, the taxpayers. So I think there's a lot of lenses through which to view why open access matters. Maybe this is kind of an argument we've won in the last 15 months, because I think the pandemic has really shown the value of research being not behind a paywall. A lot of publishers actually put their clinical research, they pulled it from behind a paywall and made it more generally available to try to help that research around COVID-19 move faster. And we've really seen what we can do when research is more readily available. But there's a lot of different ways to look at open access, and some of these are going to be more salient to different researchers than others. So we were touched on the kind of what might be the appropriate use of especially public research funding, but increasingly private foundations also feel like, if they fund something, maybe it shouldn't end up behind a paywall at the end of the day. They're trying to do things for the common good as well. There's social justice and equity issues, trying to make research more available to audiences, regardless of who it might be. Obviously, this is still talking within a range of, do you have access to the internet? But it's still a huge step forward. There's research impact. The more different kinds of audiences you can reach with the output of your research, the more you might be able to help yourself in terms of promotion and tenure, and finding collaborators, and influencing having your research have a direct influence on the everyday lives of people, depending on what area of research you're working in. You can also improve your own access. Paywalls are designed pessimistically to keep people out. And a lot of academic libraries have at least one full-time person devoted to kind of navigating all of that and keeping proxy servers up and making sure that all these permissions are in place. And there's a lot of points of failure, and any point of failure means you don't get in. So even people who, quote unquote, ought to be able to get into something because payments have been made can't get in necessarily. And if you're in a coffee shop or trying to commute on a train, you're on sabbatical somewhere, you don't have the greatest internet, the proxy server is down, whatever. I mean, you can really get tripped up yourself. And then there's this kind of looking toward the future by making research output available open access and under an open license, like a Creative Commons license. You enable other kinds of usage in the future. So maybe looking across a corpus of research for trends, that kind of big data, looking at things, or things not being trapped in a PDF really enables a lot of other kinds of access, like ADA kind of stuff, where if you want it to be spoken text or you want it to be otherwise transformed, not having it protected, having the intellectual property available to everyone is really transformative in a way that I'm guessing a law librarian audience understands from the outset. So prior to us engaging with this, just to kind of a snapshot of where we were starting from. So open access progress prior to UC putting its finger on the scale, we were really looking at only 15% of scholarly output across higher education being freely available in the final published form that you could cite and such. So 20 years into an open access movement, we weren't happy with the level of progress we were seeing. And I don't mean to denigrate all the good work that went into creating this 15%. It really set the bar for us to be able to achieve even more on top of it. So we started, this needs to be, I live in an academic context, so some of you may translate through your own circumstances. We really wanted this to be something that happened with our faculty, not something that happened to our faculty. So part of this was first circling our own wagons and making sure that our faculty understood kind of what their rights were and how their rights were maybe not being played out in the way that they would want in terms of transfer of intellectual property rights to a publisher when they were publishing, how much transparency there wasn't in the process in terms of the library entering into a contract that might be protected by a non-disclosure agreement. So we can't even talk to other libraries about what we have, what we were able to accomplish. So this circling of wagons took a couple of years. We wanted to make sure that our governance structures all were on board with this, that the faculty writ large was at least somewhat on board with things. And I don't want to claim that like all faculty are 100% behind this, but we wanted to make sure that we had sufficient support that we could enter into these negotiations. And then it was only after we had these internal steps that we announced publicly that we would be taking this on. And for the biggest publishers, our negotiating team involves library people and faculty. And that's important because the publisher needs to hear why this is important to faculty. So it's not just about library budgets and wanting to, the library wanting to do something. It is something that the faculty want. They want to be able to retain their rights. So our goals for negotiations, so a year ago, this talk would have maybe focused on Elsevier because at the time we were in a very public standoff with Elsevier. So our goals with Elsevier, but also our goals for everyone, kind of fall into three buckets. So one is that our faculty and other researchers, grad students, postdocs, clinicians, et cetera, really want to be able to publish open access by default, and they want to really retain the rights to their intellectual property. I mean, it's, and if you are someone who creates intellectual property, totally makes sense to you, perhaps. The libraries, we're looking for cost reduction and cost control. I say the libraries, but this is the faculty have a governance role in the running of the university, and they, depending on their level of engagement, they care very much about how the budget is being spent as well. So we wanted to, we had a lot of faculty who were publishing open access on their own, so the library was continuing to pay a subscription cost. And then meanwhile, we had researchers paying open access publishing fees such that their article would be published open access. And these were completely unconnected revenue streams for the publisher. And so we want to tie those together so that as more money comes in from one revenue stream, the money coming in from the other revenue stream ought to balance out. And then thirdly, we wanted transparency of outcomes. So we no non-disclosure agreement, and this enables us to enable smaller institutions to be able to look at what we did and say, we want what the University of California has, or we want that, but with some changes or whatever. It lets us share with other academic libraries and other entities that engage with these publishers so that they can make informed negotiations themselves. So, a typical result of this would be what we call a transformative open access agreement. So it should address these faculty concerns around author rights and transparency. What we call offsetting, which is the two revenue streams ought to be in balance. So the reading fee or subscription fees to be able to read articles ought to go down as you pay more and more to have articles published by your own authors. Because we do have a lot of authors with either federal funds or other granting agencies where they're more than happy to pay these open access publishing fees. We also wanted to, in our typical agreement, incorporate a multi-payer model where say the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or the NIH or whomever can pay their bit of the publishing fee, and the libraries will use some of its subscription savings to offset that and help pay either the first $1,000 or the entirety of the article processing fee, depending on whether it's a researcher who has funds available or not. So coming from, this is kind of where we started a couple of years ago. So the libraries across UC collectively are paying $40 million a year for subscription access to stuff. This does not include law library budgets, I should say. This is the 10 main libraries. And meanwhile, UC authors were ponying up another $10 million in a year in open access fees. So these numbers no longer add up to 40, they now add up to 50. So we thought either this number should be 40, or we should get more value for our money, or both, or somewhere in the middle. So that's the contours of the conversations that we're having with publishers. So the emerging model that we have with a number of publishers now is what I just referred to as this multi-payer model. So the libraries would fund a certain amount, and whatever external funding that the researcher has would pay the remainder, and the author can publish open access. So this is kind of just a very abstract, like how would you get from point A to point B? So you have an accepted manuscript, and at that point they're prompted with a choice. We've maintained that our authors have intellectual freedom to publish how they want. So if somebody wants to or needs to publish behind a paywall, they can. We're hoping that most people publish open access, and that will be the default option. And you can see there either they would get a library subvention plus use their grant money. That's probably if they're in a STEM discipline. Or the library might pay the article processing charge in full, and that's probably if they're in a humanistic discipline. Why would you publish closed access? There are some folks who write articles that have intellectual property that is not theirs embedded in the article. So this might be like a chemistry or art history where your existing intellectual property, you can get the rights to publish that behind a paywall, but not, it would be unaffordable or not available to publish it open access. So there are some differences by discipline. So this gives authors a lot of freedom, and really kind of reclaims this research landscape a bit for the authors that are doing the content creation, which is really great for us. So benefits kind of across the board. Again, we wanted to align how we're spending our money with our values as a public institution. I infer that everybody on this call is a taxpayer in California, so this is your money we're talking about. It's good for faculty because they can increase their readership and increase their the impact of their research, hopefully. It's good for library budgets because it really it does this offsetting thing. We start tying our different revenue streams together and creating a more affordable and more predictable future for ourselves. And hopefully it'll be good for the publishing ecosystem. So if there are 3 or 4 journals that you could publish in and they cost different amounts and you only have so much research funds, perhaps you will become an economic actor within this new world that we're creating, and we'll be excited to see how this plays out and whether that drives prices up or down. We have competing theories there. And with that, I will turn it over to Sarah to talk about our progress so far.
Great, thank you, Rice. So yeah, where are we at now that we've been working diligently on this for the last few years? So our progress to date, we're really happy to announce that 35% of the articles published by our UC authors are currently in journals with transformative agreements. Another 35% of articles are in journals that we are actively in negotiations with the publishers, or we've started those conversations, which leaves the remaining 30%, no activity yet, but we are very pleased with that 70% figure, and we feel like we're really starting to move the needle. Next slide. Great, thanks, Rice. So a quick recap and an update on our most public and well-known agreement with Elsevier. So our contract with Elsevier, and this is our Science Direct contract, which encompasses their journals. Our contract ended in December of 2018. After months of negotiations, the negotiations were stalled in February of 2019. There was just too large of a delta over the pricing and our open access terms. Ultimately, our access was cut off to that Elsevier content in July of 2019. It's important to point out that we did have perpetual access rights to most of that journal content through the entirety of 2018. So getting our access cut off really only impacted our access to new content. So our articles that were published in 2019 and 2020, and then a little bit of 2021. It's important to point out that we did make sure to be very careful and diligent to retain the academic freedom of our authors. We made no public statements, no private statements about trying to encourage our faculty members to either not publish in Elsevier titles or not, participate in that with that publisher in terms of editorial positions. Nothing of that regard. We allowed them to continue on and however they wanted to. We were able to also provide alternative access to articles that folks were looking to get to. We did a lot of ILL work in that regard. We also pointed them towards green OA options and directly contacting authors and that sort of thing. Regardless, many authors, many UC faculty members decided to resign from their editorial positions. They made that decision on their own to kind of have their solidarity with the UC system. Overall, we did get some positive media coverage, both in higher ed and mainstream presses. And while all of this kind of was going on, we continued on. We started negotiations around other deals, and we were successful in getting other OA agreements signed. All that being said, we did return back to that negotiation table with Elsevier, and a new deal was announced in March of 2021. So some quick highlights on what that looks like. It is a read and publish agreement. So everyone at UC has reading access to almost all of the Elsevier journals. This includes more than the journals that we previously subscribed to. That being said, there are some exclusions. There's a medical kind of subgroup of titles called the clinics that are not included. And there are some other society journals that are also excluded. The libraries are starting to work on resubscription options for those. So it's very possible that we may wind up doing a more traditional subscription for some of those titles. The authors, our UC authors, they're getting greater research impact since their articles are now openly and freely available to the entire world. And that includes the vast majority of the Elsevier journal titles, including the Cell Press and Lancet titles. But of course, that small number of society journals are being excluded as well from the publishing side of it. A lot of times that has to do with just their legacy contracts, and either they weren't willing or the timing wasn't right for them to kind of work those differences out. In addition to that greater impact, we also negotiated discounts on APCs. So APC is the article processing charge that our authors have to pay to publish open access. We also eliminated some of those old legacy fees like per page and color charges. Lastly, our authors can retain their rights to the articles that they're publishing, and they have more transparency to the whole publishing process because we're eliminating those NDAs. And then, of course, the UC libraries, we get that predictable controlled cost that we're always looking after so we can better budget in the future. So for our 4-year agreement, it'll only be increased by 2.6% per year, which is in kind of that standard range. So that's great for the libraries. So far we have 9 transformative agreements signed, which is fantastic. And that encompasses the 35% of articles published by UC authors. The 2 newest ones are the Royal Society and the Canadian Science Publishing folks. And we've got some more in the works, so we'll be having some more announcements soon. There are 2 here that I did want to point out, PLOS and JMIR, which stands for the Journal of Medical Internet Research. Those 2 are native OA publishers. So we're making a point to pursue those OA publishers as well as those traditional publishers. So there, no one's left out, and we're not trying to favor one over the other. We're trying to support all endeavors here. And we do have the ultimate goal of having all of our journal publishers in some kind of OA agreement That is our overall goal. So who might be next in terms of the publishers that UC will be in negotiations with? This is kind of a wordy matrix, but the general gist is we take a look at two main things when we are starting to think about and prioritize what publishers to negotiate with. Those two things are publishing output and the publisher's readiness or the opportunities there. So we take a look at across the board what our UC publishing volume looks like, because we do want to make those meaningful negotiations and meaningful agreements to make sure that all campuses are seeing the benefits of that. So the higher the publishing rates, the more likely we'll start pursuing that publisher. The other one here, the readiness and the opportunity, that has to do with, does the publisher already have a model in place? Are they willing to work with us to maybe create a new model or to adjust their existing model so that it fits better with our goals? Are they engaged in that process? Are they interested and willing to do this? Are our faculty advocating for for a transformative agreement with a publisher that maybe they're on the editorial board for? Is it going to set a precedent in any way? Is there a unique collaborative opportunity? Those are the things that we start thinking about. And on the matrix, we pursue those publishers that are in the upper right quadrant. And over time, we're hoping that more publishers will kind of move in that direction with their willingness to engage in these conversations. We did also want to point out that the UC system, we are pursuing other initiatives outside of this Gold OA transformative agreement APC world that Bryce and I have been talking about. And so I wanted to point out some of those here. So our institutional repository for the entire UC is called eScholarship, and we have been using that as a publishing infrastructure. We currently host over 90 open access journals on that platform. And as you can imagine, the whole Elsevier standoff did increase some questions and interest in getting some more journals on that platform. We also have been receiving grant funding to further that platform and to make it sustainable in the future. Another initiative, another group that we're a part of is called the Transitioning Society Publishers to Open Access, TSPOA. There's a lot of alphabet soup in this world. So it's a group of publishers as well as librarians and faculty members and those interested in this space, where they come together and talk about ways to support those smaller and society publishers to get their infrastructure in place and that sort of thing when they don't have either the funding or the staffing of those large publishers, and how can they continue to be active in open access. We also have a repository called Dryad, which is specifically for research data. So that can help our authors meet all of the different open access mandates and things like that that come with their grant funding. And then lastly, the two that are listed here are focused more on monographs and ebooks. So there's another initiative called Toward an Open Monograph Ecosystem, or TOME, that UC Davis in particular is involved in, and that is supporting kind of the similar infrastructure and financials that deal more with ebooks versus these journals and articles. And then Davis also did receive a quite hefty grant money from the Department of Education in 2018 to support OERs, or open education resources, specifically for STEM textbooks. And then lastly, we did want to point out that UC is really here to support everyone's journey to open access, not just our own. And in that regard, we've been very active in this space and providing lots of resources and opportunities to have these conversations. On our OSC, or our Office of Scholarly Communication website, we have two different toolkits. One has to do with these different pathways to open access and ways in which you can pursue those. So again, not just gold OA or APC based OA, but more of the green OA that we're talking about with eScholarship and lots of other initiatives. And then the other toolkit has to deal with negotiation specifically. So if you're starting to have those conversations with publishers and you're not quite sure how to craft that conversation, that toolkit can help you out with that. And as Rice already mentioned, we've been pushing for getting rid of those NDAs. So all of our transformative agreements to date are publicly available on our website. You can take a look at those again to help kind of navigate your own negotiations. And lastly, we've had public events in the past, and I'm hoping post-COVID we'll continue to have those. We had a forum in 2018 called Choosing Pathways to Open Access. And then in 2019, we had another open access workshop. So yeah, we're here and we're open and we're happy to have those conversations.
So I'll just chime in case you're wondering why my face appears in between Rice and Sarah's. I would just like to thank Rice and Sarah for saying yes when I asked them if they could present on this topic, and mention that if we had this last year, our discussion would have been different, since we were still in the midst of the embargo and the negotiations. I put in the chat the link to the guide that was shared with people wondering how they could get to these articles that they couldn't access while we were in the midst of these negotiations. And I'll just say that you know, UC as an entity is a pretty powerful negotiator. Part of that power comes from the faculty and librarians and staff that were willing to go through sort of the little bit painful period of not being able to access this content. And we banded together and we made it happen. I'm saying we, I didn't. Anyway, that's me, and we're happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Rice, Sarah, and Ramona. That was a great presentation. It was really great to see all that. Again, as a reminder, if you have any questions for our speakers, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat, either to everyone or directly to me. We do have one question in from Diane Rodriguez. Has there been any luck working with legal publishers? And is there another phase, or is that another phase?
So that is an excellent question, and I will try to answer. When I say that UC is a strong negotiator, it's true. However, the law libraries are affiliated with the university library. They are not under the same management structure or budget as the university library. So our budgets are negotiated kind of outside that whole sphere. And legal publishers. Legal publishers are for-profit companies, as opposed to, I mean, I don't know, the meta. I'm stumbling over my words here. From my point of view, no, there has been no luck working with legal publishers, though I don't think that we've contemplated that. And I'll let Rice and or Sarah weigh in on the question of, is that another phase? I think probably not, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think this is, well, the current effort is really about transforming how we use the university library budgets. So those 10 budgets across the 10 campuses. So the various law libraries, Ramona said, they're kind of budgeted separately. So not that we wouldn't help with strategy and such, but they would, you know, in that readiness appetite slash how much we publish chart, I'm guessing the readiness appetite would be very low for those publishers. Even if we were to fold them in, they probably wouldn't happen soon, just because well, you know, we're trying to, I guess, build as much momentum as we can, and so either easy wins or hard wins that are splashy, I think, are where we're focused right now. The way that the whole economic model works out, where eventually we will take subscription savings and help out humanists, we kind of had to front load some of the STEM publishers to start to realize some of the transforming of our library budgets in order to make the subsequent phases happen. So there's a reason that Springer and Elsevier happened before, say, Sage or Taylor and Francis. For those of you who know your academic publishers, we deliberately front-loaded STEM because that's where the research money is typically.
Thank you. I have another question. I was really impressed to see your commitment to sort of transparency of your agreements and your commitment to supporting other institutions by just, you know, the toolkits and all of the things that you provide. I imagine that starting a project like this from scratch would just be insurmountable for a lot of institutions. And so have you had many institutions reach out to you for assistance or for downloading the toolkit and all of that?
Yes. So the events that Sarah mentioned maybe should have been a little more proactive than they were, but in some ways they were reactive. We were getting so many requests for help that it was simpler to stand up some events to try to, you know, kind of have some economies of scale where you could, the first one was it was a more agnostic discussion about open access and how to, you know, how different models work better than others, maybe, you know, for different situations. I want to say that was capped at 125 or 150, and it was sold out. The second event was more collaborative. It needed to be a dean or university librarian with a member of their own faculty to show that they had kind of done their pre-work of educating their faculty and getting that kind of, they were there. In other words, they were ready to do something this year. And we had a interactive, I want to say it was a 1.5 day long workshop that was attached to ALA annual. It would have been 2 summers ago now, given the pandemic. So those were, and the stuff on our website is downloaded all the time. And I mean, I get requests to, you know, answer questions or whatever all the time. So we're definitely, people are definitely at least curious, somewhere between curious and inspired, depending on where they are in their journey.
I'll just jump in and say that Rachel Sandberg, some of you might remember as a former NOCAL member, heads up the Berkeley Office of Scholarly Communications, and she has been integral in this effort, and I believe has largely put on these events and is really a force behind this effort.
And I have a more behind the scenes role where I deal much more with publishers than our users or other librarians at other institutions. And it's kind of similar in that publishers will reach out to me and see if we're willing to do an open access agreement, either locally or try to convince the entire system to transform their agreement. And that's kind of where the matrix comes into play, where trying to figure out, you know, who should we spend all this time with versus maybe we're not quite ready. Why don't we revisit this in another year or two? So it's not just other librarians asking for help, it's other publishers as well, knowing that we have all this experience and they're interested in doing it, but they're not quite sure where to start.
That's fantastic. And yeah, that matrix was really interesting. As you've been more successful in creating these agreements, is sort of the momentum. Are publishers moving into that top red quadrant more quickly? Like as you, is it sort of a self-fulfilling cycle?
I'll say yes, but this has a long tail to it. So the big publishers are figuring it out. I think well, they're each at their own pace, but Europe is a few years ahead of us. So it's not like the University of California is like coming out of nowhere here. It's just when the University of California kind of made its declaration, it was part of a commitment to try to figure out how this works in the North American market, because a lot of European countries, it's like the country does a buyout, for its universities. So it's a little different how it works in the North American context. So, but so whether it's a for-profit or a not-for-profit entity, like they've got a board, and there's some. The publisher itself has to sort out what it wants and, convince itself that it can still, be made whole at the end of a transformative agreement. So they're not like putting their own revenue stream in danger. And, then there's kind of, they need to work with their board and make sure that their board understands and can approve this. It can be really risky to like, okay, let's just throw out our entire business model and have an entirely different one. It's going to be fine. It's like, okay, no, this is going to take like a day and a half retreat with your board to walk them through it. And maybe it's something where it's multiple conversations, and that in some ways, the political aspect, I think, is often the most daunting for these publishers, because it's not a small change for them. In some ways, the operationalizing it, like making this into business logic is, I won't say it's easy, but it's maybe straightforward at this point, because at this point we've done it a few times and we have some ideas. And for a conglomerate publisher, they have all these upstream contracts. They have guaranteed revenue that they have to give to the society of whomever, based on old models. So they have a lot of financial commitments that are literally contracts. And so whether this new business model works or not, they have to honor those. And the contracts are often, years, so you can have some long-term contracts. So there's all of it. It can be fairly complicated for a publisher. Having said that, I actually think the big publishers are figuring out how to move their big ship with a small rudder. And it's actually some of the really little guys that I think are going to be the long tail, where it's a society that still controls its own publication. And, there's a woman named Barb, and she makes the publication happen. And like, it's, I don't know how many of you are like just waiting for a Barb to retire, but like they might have a situation like that where we can't make this change right now. So, but I will say, having a couple and being able to do a presentation at a conference where we show that it works and we show the workflow and whatever, and like publishers are in the audience as well. It's not just librarians. So like they come and they're curious and they want to hear if it's working, and they want to hear the publisher up on stage with us saying, yes, it's totally working and we're getting the revenue we need. And, and revenue is it's not bad necessarily. I mean, some of these societies get the money, and that's how they do lobbying of Congress. That's how they send graduate students to the annual conference. That's how they do, some really good work. But they may be counting on that revenue to keep the society alive.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like we're at time. So thank you so much, Rice, Sarah, and Ramona, for your wonderful presentation. Really appreciate it. And I think Julia has.
Thank you for the opportunity.